Rebecca stopped walking when she saw Lawrence place his hand gently against another woman's back. He was smiling at her in a way Rebecca hadn't seen in a long time, and for a few seconds she simply stood there with her phone lowered at her side. Lawrence had no idea she was watching. He looked completely comfortable, like this was the person he had expected to meet all along. Rebecca knew that woman wasn't just a colleague. She knew because she knew Lawrence. Her fingers tightened around her phone, but she didn't call his name. Instead, she lifted the camera, took one picture, and walked away. By the time Lawrence came home that evening, Rebecca had already opened a file she hadn't touched in 12 years, and inside it was the life she once wanted. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, where every story leaves a lesson. Whether you're new here or part of our growing family, thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done in the same situation. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more meaningful stories to people around the world. Now let's begin today's story. Rebecca kept her eyes on that old file for another few seconds before closing it. She could still hear Lawrence moving around downstairs. He was home. He had no idea what she had seen, and he certainly had no idea why. After 12 years of marriage, his wife had suddenly started looking at the life they built as if she were deciding whether she still belonged in it. By the time Lawrence came downstairs that evening, Rebecca had already moved his dinner plate from the oven to the table twice. The first time, he had texted that he would be home at 7. At 7:30, he said traffic had slowed him down. At 8:15, he wrote, "Don't wait for me." Rebecca had still waited. When he finally walked into the kitchen, he loosened his tie with one hand and looked at the plate. "You didn't have to do that." Rebecca glanced up from her phone. "You said you hadn't eaten." "I forgot I said that." She smiled a little. "Apparently I didn't." Lawrence kissed the side of her head and reached for a glass. That was how most things worked between them, Rebecca remembered. Lawrence forgot. Rebecca adjusted. Lawrence appreciated it, usually, and for a long time Rebecca had never considered that arrangement a problem. She knew his travel schedule better than he did. She knew which weeks were difficult at work, which clients tended to keep him late, and which mornings he needed to leave the house before 6. She also knew where the spare batteries were when the property taxes were due, which family birthdays were coming up, and that Lawrence hated being asked about work the moment he walked through the door. Their house in Charlotte wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable. Rebecca had chosen most of the furniture slowly, one piece at a time. The framed photographs along the hallway had stories behind them. The dining table had been bought during their 4th year of marriage, after they spent an entire Saturday arguing over whether they needed a 6-seat table. They had bought the 6-seat table. They had never needed all 6 chairs. Rebecca still liked it. There were parts of their marriage she genuinely loved. Lawrence could still make her laugh when she was trying not to. He knew she hated pulp in her orange juice. He could tell when she was pretending not to be annoyed. And when they were alone without phones, schedules, or work interrupting them, they could still fall into the easy conversation that had made them friends before they became husband and wife. That was what made everything difficult. Rebecca wasn't living inside a marriage she had always hated. She was living inside one that had once felt very good. After dinner, Lawrence sat at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone. Rebecca stood at the counter sorting the mail. "Did you call your sister?" she asked. Lawrence looked up. "For what?" "Her birthday." "That's Friday. It's Thursday." He frowned at his phone. "You're right." Rebecca laughed softly. "You've been saying Thursday all week. I've had a lot going on." "I know." She said it without accusation. That was another habit she had developed. Whenever Lawrence forgot something, Rebecca supplied an explanation for him. Work was busy. Travel was exhausting. He had a lot on his mind. Everybody forgot things. She rarely asked herself what it meant when she was always the one doing the understanding. Lawrence's phone buzzed. He looked down immediately. Rebecca noticed the change in his face. Not a smile exactly, just a quick softening around his eyes before his expression returned to normal. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He turned the phone face down. Rebecca nodded and went back to the mail. A few minutes later, Lawrence stood. "I'm going to shower." "Okay." He walked toward the stairs, then stopped. "Did we have anything Saturday?" Rebecca looked at him. "You told me about the dinner last week." "What dinner?" "The one with your clients." "Oh." He rubbed his forehead. Right. Rebecca waited. Lawrence gave her an apologetic smile. I've got too much in my head. I can tell. He leaned down and kissed her. You're the best. Then he went upstairs. Rebecca remained at the counter. The compliment should have made her feel loved. Instead, for just a second, she wondered why being the person who could handle everything had become the thing Lawrence praised most about her. She folded the mail into a neat stack. Then she pushed the thought away. There was no reason to make something out of nothing. That was what she told herself. She had been telling herself that for years. 12 years earlier, Rebecca had been the one who talked about work until Lawrence told her she was doing it again. Not because he was annoyed, because he liked hearing her talk. They were sitting in a small Charlotte restaurant after work, sharing an appetizer they had ordered because neither of them wanted a full meal. Rebecca had her phone beside her, open to an email she had already read 3 times. Lawrence noticed. What's that? Rebecca turned the phone toward him. I got it. He read the message. Then he looked at her. Seriously? She nodded. I got it. He smiled before she did. Rebecca, that's great. She laughed, almost embarrassed by how happy she was. The opportunity wasn't just another position. It was a kind of career step she had been working toward for years. It would mean more responsibility, better pay, travel, and a chance to prove that she could build something of her own. Lawrence knew that. He had listened to her talk about it for months. He had even teased her about how many times she had practiced answering interview questions. Now he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You deserve this. Rebecca looked at him. You really think so? I know so. For a while they talked about what their lives might look like if she accepted. Then Lawrence's expression changed, only slightly. There is one thing. Rebecca waited. My next few months are going to be rough. She already knew. His company was entering an important period, and Lawrence had been working longer hours. He had started traveling more. There were meetings he couldn't move and people he couldn't disappoint. Rebecca looked down at the table. How rough? Pretty bad. How long? I don't know. He didn't say no. He didn't tell her she couldn't take the opportunity. Instead, he explained what the timing would mean. Travel for her, travel for him. 2 demanding schedules, less time together, more pressure at home. Rebecca listened. What would you do? She asked. Lawrence paused. That's not really fair. Why? Because it's your opportunity. She smiled faintly. You have an opinion. Of course I do. He leaned back. I just don't want us to get so caught up chasing everything that we forget why we're doing any of it. Rebecca was quiet. That sentence stayed with her. On the drive home, neither of them talked much. The next morning, Rebecca looked at the email again. She could accept. She could also decline. Nobody was physically stopping her. That was why the decision stayed with her for so long. A week later, she sat across from Lawrence at their kitchen table. I think I'm going to turn it down. Lawrence looked up from his coffee. Are you sure? Rebecca nodded. I don't want you trying to manage all of this by yourself. I wasn't asking you to do that. I know. She reached for his hand. But I don't want our first year of marriage to feel like we're competing over whose career matters more. Lawrence held her fingers. You don't have to give this up for me. I know. He looked at her carefully. Then don't. Rebecca smiled. I've thought about it. She had. At least she believed she had. Lawrence didn't argue anymore. He simply pulled her closer. Whatever you decide, we'll make room for your turn. Rebecca rested her head against his shoulder. When? He laughed softly. You're already asking? I'm serious. So am I. He kissed her forehead. Later. Rebecca believed him. That was the important part. She wasn't walking away from her dream because Lawrence had ordered her to. She was choosing what she thought was temporary. She believed marriage meant taking turns. Sometimes one person carried more, then the other person got their chance, so she declined the opportunity. For the first few months, she didn't regret it. Lawrence's career did become demanding. He worked late. He traveled. There were weeks when they barely had a normal evening together. Rebecca told herself she had made the right choice. Then 1 year passed. Lawrence's career improved. His responsibilities increased. Rebecca waited for him to say something. He didn't. 2 years passed. There was always something else. A promotion, a difficult client, a new project, a trip, a financial goal they were trying to reach. Whenever Rebecca considered bringing up her career again, she remembered how much Lawrence had been carrying. So she waited. Eventually she stopped checking for the right moment, and without either of them saying it aloud, the promise Lawrence had made at that kitchen table began to disappear from their daily life. Rebecca didn't notice when it became normal. She only noticed much later that she was still waiting for her turn. Rebecca didn't wake up one morning and decide that Lawrence's career mattered more than hers. It happened in smaller ways. A year after she turned down the opportunity, Lawrence's workload became heavier. Then came the promotion, then another round of travel. Whenever Rebecca thought about returning to her own career, there was a practical reason to wait. They were saving for the house. Then they were fixing the house. Then Lawrence was traveling too much. Then Rebecca was helping with family responsibilities. There was always something. And because none of those reasons sounded unreasonable by themselves, Rebecca never felt justified in calling them a pattern. She simply adjusted. When Lawrence had an early flight, she changed her morning. When he had a late meeting, she ate dinner without him. When he needed a quiet weekend, she postponed plans. Eventually, she became very good at knowing what Lawrence needed before he asked. She wasn't keeping score. At least she didn't think she was. Sometimes Lawrence would come home and find that Rebecca had already handled something he had forgotten. "You take care of everything," he would say. Rebecca would smile. "I know." She meant it as a joke. Years later, she would remember those words differently. Their marriage still had warmth. They took trips. They celebrated birthdays. There were nights when Lawrence came home with takeout and they sat at the kitchen counter laughing about something neither of them would remember a week later. Rebecca wasn't pretending those moments didn't matter. They did. That was why she stayed emotionally invested. She still believed there would be a time when Lawrence would look at her and say, "Okay, your turn." But somewhere along the way, she stopped waiting for him to say it. She started telling herself she didn't need it anymore. Her old career files went into a drawer. The professional contacts faded. The clothes she had once worn to interviews were pushed toward the back of the closet. She still had the ability. She just stopped testing it. Lawrence didn't ask why. Perhaps he assumed she had changed her mind. Rebecca assumed he remembered. Neither assumption was ever checked. By the time the marriage reached its 12th year, their life looked settled from the outside. Their home was comfortable, their bills were paid, their careers were established. Friends described them as solid. Rebecca sometimes heard people say things like, "You two have it figured out." She usually laughed. She never knew what to say to that, because there were things about her life that felt good, and there were other things she had stopped mentioning. Then Lawrence started coming home later. At first it was once or twice a week, then more often. He had explanations, client dinners, work events, last-minute meetings. Rebecca believed most of them. Why wouldn't she? She had spent years trusting him. One Thursday evening, Lawrence came through the door almost an hour later than he had promised. Rebecca was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. "You ate?" he asked. "Not yet." He glanced toward the clock. "You should have eaten." Rebecca closed the laptop. "I was waiting." He gave her an apologetic look. "I told you I'd be late. You said 8. You said 30. Rebecca looked at him. "That's not the point." Lawrence paused. For a moment neither spoke. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it. Rebecca watched his face. Again that brief change. A softness, a private reaction. He turned the phone over. "Work?" she asked. "Yeah." Rebecca nodded. She could have asked more. Instead, she stood. "I'll heat your food. You don't have to." "I know." She walked toward the kitchen. Behind her, Lawrence remained where he was. He watched her for a moment before putting his phone back in his pocket. Rebecca didn't know that the message had come from Natalie. She didn't know that Natalie had been part of Lawrence's life for almost a year. She didn't know that Lawrence had already told another woman that his marriage was essentially over. And she certainly didn't know that Lawrence had described her as a woman who had never really had ambitions of her own. Rebecca only knew that something about her husband's behavior had changed. For now, she still believed the problem might be work. She still believed there was a reasonable explanation. And that was exactly why Lawrence had so much time to hide what was really happening. Rebecca checked the arrival screen for the third time. Lawrence's flight had landed 12 minutes earlier. She stood near the pickup area with her phone in one hand and her car keys in the other, watching people come through the sliding doors. She had done this so many times that she could usually spot Lawrence before he spotted her. He always walked a little faster when he was tired. He usually loosened his tie before reaching the curb, and when he saw Rebecca, he would lift his chin slightly, as if to say, "There you are." She was expecting that moment. Instead, she saw Lawrence smiling at a woman. Rebecca stopped. The woman beside him was carrying a small black handbag. Lawrence was saying something to her and she laughed. Rebecca couldn't hear the conversation through the glass. She didn't need to. Lawrence reached toward the woman's back as they moved through the crowd. It was a small gesture. His hand stayed there for only a second, but Rebecca knew him. She knew how Lawrence touched people when he was being polite. A handshake, a brief pat on the shoulder, a professional smile. This wasn't that. She lowered her phone. Lawrence looked relaxed. That was what bothered her first. Not the woman, not even the touch, the ease on his face. Rebecca watched them come closer. The woman said something. Lawrence leaned toward her to hear it, then laughed. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. She took one step backward. Neither of them noticed. For a moment, Rebecca wondered if she had misunderstood what she was seeing. Maybe the woman was a colleague, maybe a client, maybe someone from the flight who needed help getting to another terminal. There were explanations. There were always explanations. Lawrence had spent 12 years giving her reasons to trust him. So Rebecca stayed where she was and watched. The woman touched his arm. Lawrence looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. That expression settled the question before Rebecca was ready to admit she had one. She slowly lifted her phone. One picture. The camera made a faint sound. Rebecca immediately lowered it. Lawrence still hadn't seen her. She could have called his name. She could have walked straight toward them. She could have asked, right there in the middle of the airport, "Who is she?" Instead, Rebecca stepped behind a group of passengers waiting for their luggage. She watched Lawrence and the woman continue toward the parking area. Her husband never looked back. That hurt more than she expected. For 12 years, Rebecca had been the person waiting at the airport. She had picked him up after late flights. She had brought him coffee when he arrived exhausted. She knew which terminal he used and which baggage claim was usually the fastest. She knew the version of Lawrence who wanted quiet after traveling and the version who wanted to talk the entire drive home. Now he was walking away with another woman as though Rebecca had never been part of the routine. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. She looked down at the photograph. Lawrence was standing beside the woman, his body angled slightly toward her. Rebecca stared at it for several seconds. Then she locked her phone. She didn't cry. She didn't call him. She didn't even send a message. She simply turned and walked toward the parking garage. By the time Lawrence reached the car he expected Rebecca to be waiting beside, she was already gone. He would probably wonder where she was. He might even call. Rebecca knew that. But as she drove home, another thought took its place. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't want to hear Lawrence explain anything. She wanted to understand what she had been refusing to see. Rebecca parked in the driveway and left the engine running. For almost a minute, she didn't move. The house looked exactly the way it had when she left that afternoon. The porch light was on. Lawrence's usual spot in the driveway was empty. Nothing about the house knew what had happened. Rebecca turned off the engine. Inside, she placed her keys on the counter and stood there. Her phone was still in her hand. She opened the photograph again. Then she closed it, opened it, closed it. Finally, she set the phone face down. Lawrence would call soon. She knew him. He would ask why she wasn't at the airport. He might say the flight had landed early. He might ask whether something had happened. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table. She thought about calling him first. She didn't. The silence gave her something she hadn't had in a long time. Time to notice what she was feeling without immediately managing someone else's feelings. She walked upstairs and changed clothes. Then she came back down and opened the cabinet above the refrigerator. Behind a stack of old folders was a thin file she hadn't touched in years. She carried it to the table. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Her name was still printed across the top. Underneath, was the name of the company that had offered her the position 12 years earlier. Rebecca opened it. There was an old email, a printed description of the role, a few notes she had written in the margins, and a calendar page with several dates circled. She remembered that period more clearly than she expected. The interviews, the excitement, the conversations with Lawrence, the night she finally decided to decline. She had spent years telling herself the same thing. I chose my marriage. That had always made the decision easier to live with. But sitting at the kitchen table that night, the sentence felt incomplete. She hadn't only chosen her marriage, she had chosen Lawrence's career when his career was more urgent. She had assumed her turn would come later. Rebecca ran her thumb over the corner of the old paper. Then her phone rang. Lawrence. She watched his name appear on the screen. It stopped. A few seconds later it rang again. Rebecca let it. The second call stopped. Then a message appeared. Where are you? I thought you were picking me up. Rebecca read it twice. She typed, I couldn't make it. She stared at the words, then deleted them. She tried again. I had something come up. Deleted. Finally she put the phone down. She wasn't ready to lie, but she wasn't ready to tell him the truth either. Not yet. Her eyes returned to the old file. Rebecca took out a notebook. At the top of the first page she wrote 3 words, things I postponed. She stared at the sentence. Then she began writing. The career opportunity, professional contacts, things she had wanted to learn, places she had wanted to go, plans she had stopped mentioning. She expected the list to be short. It wasn't. After 20 minutes she stopped. The page was nearly full. Rebecca leaned back. For years she had thought of those things as small disappointments. That night, seeing them together made them look different. Not because Lawrence had stolen them, he hadn't. Because she had spent 12 years making sure there was always a good reason not to reach for them. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. I'll explain when I get home. Rebecca stared at it. She didn't know whether Lawrence was talking about the airport or something else. That was the part that frightened her. She put the phone down. Then she looked at the list again. At the bottom of the page she wrote one final sentence. Find out what is still possible. She closed the notebook. For the first time that night, Rebecca wasn't thinking about what Lawrence might say when he came home. She was thinking about what she might do if she stopped waiting for him to make room for her. Lawrence came home a little after 9. Rebecca heard the front door open while she was still sitting at the kitchen table. She closed the notebook. A few seconds later, Lawrence appeared in the doorway. You're home. Rebecca looked at him. I've been home. He stopped. You weren't at the airport. No, I called you. I saw. Lawrence put his keys down. What happened? Rebecca watched him take off his jacket. Nothing. He frowned. You said you couldn't make it. I couldn't. There was a pause. Lawrence looked at her for another second. Are you okay? Rebecca almost laughed. The question came so naturally from him that it made her uncomfortable. I'm tired. Did something happen? No. He nodded slowly, though he clearly didn't believe her. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Rebecca saw the change in his expression again. This time she didn't look away. Lawrence turned the phone over. I'm going upstairs. Okay. He took 2 steps before stopping. Rebecca, she looked up. Yeah? Nothing. He continued upstairs. Rebecca waited until she heard the bedroom door close. Then she opened her laptop. She searched for the old professional contact she had been thinking about. Her first attempt brought up an outdated company page. The second led her to a professional directory. There was the name she remembered. Still working. Still in the same field. Rebecca hesitated before reaching for her phone. She typed a message. Hi, I know it's been a long time. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to ask you something about the work we were doing years ago. She read it 3 times. Then she sent it. Her heart started beating faster. It was such a small thing. A message. Nothing more. Still, Rebecca sat back as if she had just done something much larger. Upstairs, Lawrence was having a very different conversation. Natalie had been waiting for his call. When he finally answered, she said, Did she pick you up? No. Why? I don't know. Natalie was quiet. You don't know? She said something came up. You sound worried. I'm not worried. Natalie gave a short laugh. You are. Lawrence sat on the edge of the bed. Rebecca has been acting strange lately. Strange how? I don't know, she's just different. Natalie waited. Different from what? Lawrence rubbed his face. She used to be more dependent on me. The silence on the other end lasted a little too long. Dependent? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Lawrence sighed. You haven't met her. Rebecca is comfortable. She likes stability. Natalie leaned back in her chair. You've told me that, because it's true. Then why are you so bothered that she didn't come get you? Lawrence didn't answer. Natalie noticed. She had been hearing about Rebecca for almost a year. Rebecca was afraid of starting over. Rebecca was comfortable. Rebecca didn't really have ambitions. Rebecca was staying because she didn't know what else to do. Lawrence had repeated those things so often that Natalie had stopped questioning them. But lately, small details weren't fitting. Lawrence knew exactly how Rebecca liked her coffee. He knew which foods she wouldn't eat. He remembered the first apartment they shared. He still talked about certain trips with a softness Natalie had never heard when he discussed his marriage as a whole. Now he was worried because Rebecca had missed an airport pickup. Natalie asked quietly, Does she know about me? Lawrence sat up. No. You sure? Yes. He sounded certain. Natalie didn't respond. Across Charlotte, Rebecca's phone lit up. A message from her old professional contact. Of course, I'd be happy to talk. It's been a long time. Rebecca stared at it. Then another message appeared. Are you thinking about coming back? Rebecca looked toward the stairs. Lawrence was still upstairs. For 12 years she had measured decisions by how they would affect him. This time, she didn't. She typed, I'm thinking about finding out if I still can. She sent it before she could change her mind. Then she closed the laptop. For the first time since the airport, Rebecca smiled. It wasn't because she had figured Lawrence out. She hadn't. It was because she had just opened a door Lawrence didn't know existed. The first thing Rebecca did the following Monday was delete the word maybe from an email she had been drafting. She had spent most of Sunday writing to an old professional contact, then changing the message, then deciding it sounded too eager, then deciding it sounded too desperate. Finally she wrote, I'd like to talk about returning to the field. She read it once, then she sent it. There was no dramatic feeling afterward, just a nervous breath and the sudden awareness that she had no idea what would happen next. The reply came 2 hours later. I'd be glad to catch up. A lot has changed since you left. That last sentence stayed with her. A lot had changed. She knew that. What she didn't know was whether there was still a place for her in it. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca began learning what she had missed. She read industry updates at night. She attended a professional event by herself. She took notes. She asked questions. At one point, someone introduced her to a woman who had entered the field years after Rebecca and was now doing work Rebecca once imagined herself doing. Rebecca smiled and congratulated her. In the car afterward, she sat behind the steering wheel and admitted something she hadn't wanted to admit. She was jealous. Not of the woman herself, of the years. She had spent 12 years telling herself that waiting had been harmless. Now she could see what 12 years actually looked like. Still, she kept going. Some doors didn't open. One company never responded. Another contact told her the industry had changed significantly and suggested she consider starting at a lower level than she had once expected. That one hurt. Rebecca sat in her car afterward with the rejection email open on her phone. For a few minutes she considered putting everything away. Maybe Lawrence had been right. Maybe she had changed. Maybe the life she had once imagined belonged to a younger version of herself. Then she remembered something. She had been 20-something when she turned down that opportunity. She had been 30-something when she decided it was too late. Those were not the same thing. Rebecca closed the email. She wasn't going to pretend the years hadn't happened. She simply refused to let them decide what the next years would be. At home, Lawrence began noticing. The first thing he noticed was that Rebecca stopped rearranging her schedule around him. When he mentioned a dinner, she didn't immediately check her calendar. Friday? Maybe, she said. Lawrence looked up. Maybe? I have something. What? Rebecca hesitated. Work. He waited for an explanation. She didn't give one. What kind of work? I'm figuring that out. Lawrence gave a small laugh. Okay. Rebecca went back to her laptop. He stood there another second. Are you upset with me? She looked at him. No. Then what's going on? I've been thinking about some things. Like what? Rebecca closed the laptop. Like what I want to do. Lawrence stared at her. It wasn't the answer he expected. You mean career-wise? Yes. He nodded slowly. Are you sure you want to get back into that? Rebecca noticed the wording. Not do you want to. Not what would make you happy. Are you sure? She didn't argue. I don't know yet. Lawrence pulled out a chair. Rebecca, it's been a long time. I know. It might be harder than you think. I know. You have a good life here. Rebecca looked at him for several seconds. I know. The conversation ended there, but Lawrence didn't look satisfied. Neither did Rebecca. Later that night she received another email. An old contact had forwarded an opening that might fit her experience. It wasn't the position she had once been offered. It wasn't even close, but it was an opening. Rebecca read the description twice. Then she clicked apply. She didn't tell Lawrence, not because she was hiding something, because she was tired of needing someone else to confirm that her decision made sense. The next morning, Lawrence asked if she had seen his travel schedule. Rebecca was already putting on her coat. No, I sent it last night. I'll check later. He looked at her. You're not going to remind me about the appointment Friday. Rebecca stopped. She almost apologized. Instead, she said, You put it on your calendar. Lawrence blinked. Right. Rebecca left. It was a small exchange. Neither of them raised their voice. Nothing dramatic happened. But Lawrence stood in the hallway long after the door closed. For 12 years, Rebecca had quietly carried things he hadn't even realized she was carrying. Now she was putting some of them down. And Lawrence was beginning to notice the weight only because he was no longer being asked to carry it. Natalie noticed the inconsistency on a Tuesday night. Lawrence had been talking about Rebecca, something he usually avoided unless Natalie asked. She never really wanted a career, he said. She liked having a comfortable life. Natalie looked at him. You said she used to work in that field. She did. So she wanted it once? Lawrence shrugged. People change. Natalie didn't answer. Lawrence picked up his drink. What? Nothing. You've got that look. What look? Like you're about to ask me something. Natalie smiled faintly. Okay, why did she stop? Lawrence's expression tightened. She chose not to continue. Because of you? He looked at her. Because of the marriage. Natalie waited. Lawrence sighed. She had an opportunity years ago. It would have meant travel, strange hours, all of that. I was in the middle of a major period at work. We talked about it. She decided it wasn't the right time. You talked about it? Yes. And you told her not to take it? No. Natalie studied him. Then what did you tell her? Lawrence looked away. I told her we'd figure it out. That's not what I asked. He rubbed his thumb against the side of his glass. I told her there would be another opportunity. Natalie sat back. Did you believe that? At the time. And did she? Lawrence didn't answer. Natalie knew that silence. She had heard it before when Lawrence didn't want to admit something even to himself. She really wanted it, didn't she? Yes. The answer came too quickly. Natalie stared at him. You knew. I knew. Then why do you keep saying she never had ambitions? Lawrence frowned. Because she doesn't anymore. Natalie shook her head. That's different. Lawrence looked irritated. You weren't there. No, I wasn't. Rebecca made her decision. I understand that. Then what's the issue? Natalie looked at him. The issue is that you're describing a woman who gave something up as if she never wanted it. Lawrence didn't respond. The room became quiet. Natalie wasn't defending Rebecca. She wasn't even sure what she believed about their marriage anymore. She was trying to understand the man sitting across from her. Lawrence had spent months telling her Rebecca was afraid of starting over. Now Natalie was beginning to wonder whether Rebecca had simply spent years believing that staying was what a good wife did. Later that night, Lawrence left Natalie at her apartment. He kissed her goodbye, but she didn't respond the way she normally did. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing. You've been quiet. Natalie folded her arms. I just have a question. Okay, if Rebecca had taken that job, would you have supported her? Lawrence hesitated. I would have tried. Natalie noticed the answer. Not yes, not of course, I would have tried. She looked away. Good night, Lawrence. He stood there for a moment before leaving. Across town, Rebecca was sitting at her kitchen table with the old file open again. She had found something she hadn't remembered keeping, a handwritten note. It wasn't from Lawrence, it was from herself. The writing was rushed, almost messy. She had apparently written it the night before she turned down the opportunity. Rebecca read it slowly. I'm scared that if I take this, Lawrence will think I'm putting my career before us. She stopped. There was another line underneath. He says he'll support me, but I don't want to make this harder for him right now. Rebecca lowered the paper. She remembered the decision. She remembered making it. But she had forgotten that sentence. For 12 years she had told herself she had simply chosen marriage. Now she was seeing something else. She had been afraid of disappointing Lawrence. That didn't make the decision his fault, but it changed what the decision meant. Rebecca folded the note and placed it beside the photograph from the airport. Two pieces of her life sat on the same table. One showed the woman she had become. The other showed the woman she had been. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the professional contact she had reached out to. I looked over your background. There may be an opening worth discussing. Can you meet Thursday? Rebecca stared at the message. Then she typed, yes. She pressed send. For the first time, she wasn't asking whether Lawrence would be comfortable with her answer. She was asking herself whether she was ready to live with it. And she was beginning to realize that those were two very different questions. Rebecca sat in the parking lot for several minutes before going inside. Her meeting had gone better than she expected. The professional contact she had once known had remembered more about her work than Rebecca remembered about herself. You were good, the woman had told her. Rebecca had laughed. That was a long time ago. It was, but you didn't forget everything. Those words stayed with her. She drove home thinking about the old opportunity. For 12 years she had described that decision in one sentence. I chose Lawrence. It had become almost comforting. If she had chosen it, then there was no one to blame. Not Lawrence, not herself, nobody. But the note she found had complicated that story. She had been afraid, not afraid of the work, afraid Lawrence would think she was putting herself first. That distinction mattered. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table and spread the old papers in front of her. The original opportunity, her handwritten notes, the airport photograph, her recent application, 4 pieces of paper from 4 different versions of her life. She picked up the old offer. She remembered how excited she had been. She remembered calling Lawrence afterward. She remembered him saying, I'm proud of you. She had forgotten that part. She had also forgotten how quickly the conversation had shifted toward everything that could go wrong. The travel, his schedule, the timing, their marriage, none of it had been a command. There had been no threat, no ultimatum. That was what made it harder. Lawrence had never needed to tell Rebecca, choose me. He knew she would. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. For years she had carried the entire decision as proof that she had voluntarily walked away from her ambition. Now she could see the larger pattern. She had made one compromise, then another, then another. Each one had seemed reasonable. Together they had become 12 years. Rebecca closed her eyes. She wasn't angry enough to hate Lawrence. She wasn't ready to forgive him either. What she felt was quieter. She was tired of defending a decision she no longer understood. Her phone buzzed. An email. The position she had applied for had rejected her. Rebecca stared at the screen. For a second she felt foolish. She had spent weeks building herself up, only to receive a polite rejection from someone who barely knew her. She closed the laptop. Maybe they're right, she whispered. Then she stopped. There it was again, the old habit. One setback and she was ready to make herself smaller. Rebecca opened the laptop. She read the rejection once more. Then she looked at another opening. She applied, not because she suddenly believed everything would work out, because she had finally stopped expecting one opportunity to prove whether she was still capable. That evening, Lawrence came home earlier than usual. He found Rebecca at the dining table. You've been busy. Yeah. What are you working on? Something for work. He pulled out a chair. Can I ask you something? Rebecca looked at him. Sure. Are you planning on going back full-time? She paused. I don't know. Would that mean traveling? Possibly. Lawrence nodded. That's a lot. I know. You'd have to think about how that affects us. Rebecca looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I have. Lawrence seemed surprised. I just think we should talk about it. We can. When? When I know what I'm deciding. He leaned back. Rebecca could see the frustration in his face. Years ago, she would have rushed to soften it. She would have explained. She would have reassured him. She would have said, don't worry, I'll figure something out. This time she didn't. Lawrence finally stood. Okay. He walked away. Rebecca watched him go. Then she opened the drawer beside her. The airport photograph was still there. She looked at it. The photograph had started as proof of something she didn't understand. Now it had become a reminder, not of Natalie, not even of Lawrence, of the exact moment Rebecca had stopped asking herself whether she was overreacting. She wasn't. Something had changed, and it wasn't simply her marriage. It was her understanding of herself. That night, Rebecca made one decision. She would continue pursuing the professional opportunity. She would not wait for Lawrence's approval. She would not use his reaction as a measurement of whether she was making the right choice, and she would not apologize for wanting something again. She closed the drawer. Upstairs, Lawrence's phone lit up. Natalie had sent him a message. We need to talk. Lawrence stared at it. He had no idea that while he was worrying about Rebecca becoming distant, Natalie had begun questioning the story he had told her about his wife. And soon those two problems were going to meet. Lawrence noticed the change most clearly on a Saturday morning. He was standing in the kitchen holding 2 cups of coffee when Rebecca walked in already dressed. You're going somewhere? Yes. Where? She picked up her bag from the counter. I have a meeting. On Saturday? It's the only time she was available. Lawrence handed her the coffee. You want me to come? Rebecca looked at him. No. He lowered his hand. Okay. She reached for her keys. Rebecca. She stopped. What? Can we talk? About what? He hesitated. I don't know. That answer almost made her smile. You've been asking me that a lot lately, because I feel like something's changed. Rebecca looked at him for a moment. A lot has changed. Lawrence's jaw tightened. Are you angry with me? I'm tired. That's not what I asked. I know. She picked up her bag. Lawrence watched her. For years he had been used to Rebecca filling silence before it became uncomfortable. If he was upset, she asked what was wrong. If he was quiet, she checked on him. If they disagreed, she usually tried to smooth things over before either of them went to bed. Now she didn't. That silence bothered him more than an argument might have. He followed her toward the hallway. You're not telling me what's going on. Rebecca stopped at the door. Do you want the truth? Yes. She looked at him. A lot is wrong. I just don't think talking about all of it with you is helping me right now. Lawrence stared at her. What does that mean? It means I need some time. For what? Rebecca opened the door. To figure out what I want. She left. Lawrence stood there holding the second cup of coffee. It was still warm. He put it down. Later that afternoon, he found himself thinking about the woman Rebecca had been when they first met. She had opinions about everything. She argued with him about restaurants. She wanted to travel. She talked about her career without apologizing for wanting more. Lawrence had loved that about her. Somewhere along the way, he had gotten used to the quieter version, the one who made dinner plans around his schedule, the one who knew his travel dates, the one who rarely said no. Now he was beginning to understand that her silence wasn't weakness, it was distance, and he didn't know how to close it. That evening, Lawrence tried something he hadn't done in a long time. He asked Rebecca about her meeting. She looked up from her laptop. It went well. Good. Thanks. What are you working on? An application? For the job? One of them. Lawrence nodded. That's good. Rebecca waited. He didn't say anything else. Finally, he asked, Do you need help? She closed the laptop. No. You sure? Yes. He nodded. Okay. He walked away. Rebecca watched him go. The strange thing was that she could see he was trying, but his instinct was still the same. He wanted to fix the discomfort. He wanted to know what would make her feel better. He hadn't yet understood that some things couldn't be repaired by doing more. That night, Lawrence sat alone downstairs after Rebecca went to bed. His phone was beside him. He didn't touch it. For the first time in months, the thought of Natalie didn't feel comforting. He thought about Rebecca instead. Not the wife who remembered everything. Not the woman who waited for him. Rebecca. The woman who had once told him exactly what she wanted from life. He had almost forgotten how strongly she had wanted it. And now she was becoming that woman again. The thought should have made him proud. Instead, it scared him, because Lawrence was beginning to realize something he had not wanted to admit. He wasn't sure whether Rebecca was becoming independent because she was hurt, or because she had finally stopped needing him. Natalie didn't raise her voice when Lawrence arrived at her apartment. She didn't need to. She opened the door, stepped aside, and waited until he walked in. You said we needed to talk. We do. Lawrence looked around. What's going on? Natalie folded her arms. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer without giving me the version you've been giving me. Lawrence frowned. What version? Your version of Rebecca. He looked away. Natalie, no, just answer me. She took a breath. You told me she never really had ambitions. Lawrence rubbed his jaw. She doesn't. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. Natalie continued. You told me she was comfortable, that she was afraid to start over, that she'd never really wanted much outside the marriage. That's what I've seen. But she had a career opportunity, yes. A serious one, yes. And you knew she wanted it. Lawrence didn't answer. Natalie watched him. You knew. I told you. She made her choice. I know she made the choice. Natalie's voice softened. That's the part I'm trying to understand. Lawrence sat down. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me what happened. He sighed. She got an opportunity. I was going through a difficult period at work. We talked about it. She decided to stay. And you told her you'd make room for her later. Lawrence looked at her sharply. How do you know that? Natalie didn't answer immediately. I've been listening to you. That landed differently. Lawrence looked down. I meant it. Did you? Yes. Then what happened? I don't know. Natalie gave a small, disappointed laugh. You don't know? Things changed. Things always change. Lawrence looked irritated. You weren't there. No, I wasn't. She sat across from him. But I've heard you talk about her for almost a year. Lawrence stayed quiet. You say she has no ambition, Natalie continued. But you know exactly what she wanted 12 years ago. You know what she gave up. You remember things about her you claim don't matter anymore. She's my wife. Natalie looked at him. That's not an answer. Lawrence's expression hardened. What are you trying to say? I'm trying to figure out whether you actually ended your marriage before you started this relationship. He looked away. Natalie continued. Because from where I'm sitting, you didn't. The room went quiet. Lawrence didn't argue. That silence told Natalie more than a defense would have. She leaned back. Does she know about me? No. Are you sure? Yes. Then why do you look terrified every time she doesn't answer your calls? Lawrence stood. I need to go. Natalie watched him reach for his jacket. Lawrence. He stopped. If you want me to believe you, you have to start being honest with yourself first. He didn't respond. He left. Across town, Rebecca was having a very different kind of evening. The email she'd been waiting for had finally arrived. She had been offered an opportunity to move forward in the hiring process. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a job yet. But it meant someone had looked at her experience and thought she was worth another conversation. Rebecca printed the email. She carried it into the kitchen. Lawrence came downstairs. What is that? Rebecca looked up. I got through to the next round. His face changed. Really? She nodded. That's great. Thank you. When is it? Next week. Where? Rebecca hesitated. Atlanta. Lawrence's smile faded slightly. For how long? I don't know yet. You'd have to travel? Probably. He pulled out a chair. Rebecca, that's a lot. She looked at him. I know. What about everything here? I'll handle it. I just mean... He stopped. Rebecca waited. He looked at the email again. I thought you were looking for something local. I was. And now? Now I'm looking at what's actually available. Lawrence nodded slowly. I just don't want you to make a decision because you're angry. Rebecca's expression barely changed. I'm not. Then why does it feel like you're trying to change everything? She looked at him for several seconds. Because I am. Lawrence went quiet. Rebecca folded the email and put it away. She didn't tell him about Natalie. She didn't need to. His reaction had already told her something. He was proud of her, but he was also calculating what her new choices would mean for him. And Rebecca finally understood that those two things could exist at the same time. She could be loved by someone who still didn't know how to make room for her. That realization hurt more than she expected, but it also made her next decision easier. Lawrence found the photograph by accident. Rebecca had left her laptop open on the dining table while she went upstairs to take a call. Lawrence was looking for a document he needed when he noticed a folder beside the computer. He picked it up. Inside were several old papers, a professional resume, a printed job description, a few handwritten notes, and one photograph. Lawrence recognized himself immediately. He was standing outside the airport beside Natalie. For several seconds he didn't move. Then he looked closer. The photograph had been taken from a distance. Rebecca had been there. His stomach dropped. He heard footsteps upstairs. Rebecca came down carrying her phone. She stopped when she saw what he was holding. Neither of them spoke. Lawrence put the photograph on the table. You were there. Rebecca looked at it. Yes. When? You know when. He stared at her. You saw me? Yes. Why didn't you say anything? Rebecca pulled out a chair and sat. I wasn't ready. For how long have you known? Since that day. Lawrence sat across from her. Rebecca, I can explain. She looked at him. I know. That answer stopped him. You know. I know there are explanations. Then let me explain. Rebecca shook her head. Not yet. Lawrence's voice became quieter. There's nothing between me and Natalie that... Don't. He stopped. Rebecca looked down at the photograph. I don't need you to tell me what I saw. Lawrence swallowed. It wasn't supposed to happen. How long? He didn't answer. Lawrence, almost a year. Rebecca nodded once. She had known. Hearing him say it still changed something. She looked back at him. You told her our marriage was basically over. Lawrence's face tightened. Rebecca, you told her I was afraid to start over. I was wrong. You told her I never really had ambitions of my own. Lawrence looked away. Rebecca waited. Finally he said, I shouldn't have said that. No. He looked back at her. I know you made sacrifices. Rebecca almost smiled. You remember? Of course I remember. Do you? Yes. You remember the opportunity? Yes. You remember what it meant to me? Lawrence nodded. Rebecca's voice stayed calm. Then how did you tell another woman I never had ambitions? Lawrence opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I didn't force you to give it up, he said finally. I know. I never told you that you couldn't take it. I know. Then, that was never the point. Lawrence stopped. Rebecca folded her hands on the table. You knew how much I wanted it. Yes. You knew I was worried about what taking it would do to your career. I remember. You knew I was waiting for you to have your turn. He looked down. I remember. And you told me we'd make room for mine. Lawrence's eyes lifted. I meant it. Maybe you did. She paused. But then you got used to me not having one. He looked at her. Rebecca continued. I don't think you woke up one day and decided to take my life away from me. I don't think you even realized what was happening. Lawrence's voice cracked slightly. Rebecca, but you benefited from it. Silence. You got the wife who was available when you needed her. You got the house managed, you got the schedule handled, you got someone who kept making room. Lawrence looked down at his hands. And eventually you started telling yourself that was who I was. He whispered, I didn't mean to. I know. That somehow sounded worse. Lawrence stood and walked toward the window. I love you. Rebecca looked at his back. I know. Then why are you talking like this is over? I'm not saying that. He turned. Then what are you saying? Rebecca stood. I'm saying I need to decide whether the life we built is still a life I want. Lawrence's face changed. You still love me? Rebecca looked at him for a long time. That's not the question anymore. He took a step toward her. Rebecca. She stepped back, not dramatically, just enough for him to notice. I need space. He nodded slowly. How much? I don't know. He looked frightened now. For the first time, Lawrence seemed to understand that Rebecca wasn't threatening him. She wasn't trying to make him jealous. She wasn't waiting for him to chase her. She was actually deciding, and that was something he couldn't solve for her. Rebecca didn't pack a suitcase. Not yet. Instead, she stood in the bedroom with the closet door open, looking at the clothes she had accumulated over 12 years. Some belonged to the woman who had first moved into the house with Lawrence. Others belonged to the woman she had become along the way. She pulled out a blazer she hadn't worn in years. It still fit. Rebecca held it against herself and looked in the mirror. Then she put it on. Downstairs, she heard Lawrence moving through the kitchen. She almost called his name. She didn't. A few minutes later, she walked downstairs. Lawrence was standing at the counter making coffee. He looked at the blazer. Where are you going? I have a meeting. The one about the job? Yes. He nodded. Can I come with you? Rebecca looked at him. Why? I don't know. She waited. Lawrence looked down at his coffee. I guess I just want to know what's happening. Rebecca pulled out a chair. You know what's happening. I know you're thinking about changing your career. That's part of it. Lawrence sat across from her. What else? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. The truth was, she had spent the past several days thinking about what leaving would actually mean. It wouldn't mean simply walking out the front door. There was a house. There were memories. There were 12 years of holidays, arguments, ordinary Tuesdays, inside jokes, difficult seasons, and moments when Lawrence had genuinely been there for her. There were photographs she still couldn't look at without smiling. There were things about him she still loved. That was the part she hadn't told anyone. She wasn't leaving because she had stopped loving him. She was considering leaving because she had finally realized love wasn't enough to make the life they had built healthy for her. Lawrence watched her. Do you still love me? Rebecca looked down at her hands. That's not something I can answer in a way that helps you. He swallowed. Why? Because if I say yes, you'll hear that as a promise. He didn't respond. And if I say no, she continued, I'd be lying. Lawrence looked away. For once, he didn't try to fix the answer. Rebecca stood. I need to go. He nodded. Okay. She reached the door. Rebecca? She turned. I hope the meeting goes well. She gave him a small smile. Thank you. That was all. Her meeting went better than she expected. The position wasn't perfect. The travel would be inconvenient. The work would demand more from her than she had done in years. But when the woman across the table asked, Are you ready to start again? Rebecca didn't hesitate. I'm ready to start. On the drive home, she realized something. She wasn't becoming a new person. She was becoming visible again. When she walked through the front door, Lawrence was sitting at the dining table. There were no phones in front of him, no television, just a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I got the position, Rebecca said. Lawrence looked up. He smiled. Congratulations. Thank you. When do you start? 3 weeks. He nodded. That's good. Rebecca set her bag down. Lawrence looked at her for a long moment. I've been thinking. She waited. I know I can't ask you to go back to the way things were. Rebecca said nothing. I know I've gotten used to you handling things. He rubbed his hands together. And I know I've said things about you that weren't fair. Rebecca looked at him. He stopped there. He didn't ask her to forgive him. He didn't make a speech. For the first time, he seemed to understand that an apology wasn't supposed to make her responsible for comforting him afterward. Rebecca sat across from him. I don't know what happens to us. Lawrence nodded. I know, and I don't want you making promises because you're afraid. He looked at her. I'm afraid. She gave a quiet breath of a laugh. I know. Lawrence looked down. But I'm trying to understand why. Rebecca waited. He finally said, because I think I assumed you'd always be here. She didn't answer. He continued, I thought that was what we had. Rebecca looked around the room. For 12 years this had been home. She wasn't sure whether she was ready to leave it. She wasn't sure whether she was ready to stay. But for the first time that uncertainty didn't frighten her as much as it once would have. Because the decision belonged to her. And Lawrence was finally beginning to understand that. Lawrence waited until after dinner to say it. Rebecca, don't leave. She stopped rinsing her plate. The faucet continued running. Lawrence stood behind her several feet away. I know I don't get to ask you for anything right now, he said. I know that. Rebecca turned off the water. Then why are you asking? Because I don't know what else to do. She dried her hands slowly. Lawrence pulled out a chair. Sit down. Rebecca remained standing. He looked at her. Please. She sat. Lawrence stayed across from her. For a few seconds he said nothing. Then he rubbed his palms together. I thought I had more time. Rebecca's expression didn't change. More time for what? To fix things. You didn't know they were broken. I knew something was wrong. You knew I was changing. Yes, that's different. Lawrence nodded. I know. He looked at the table. I kept thinking you'd get through whatever you were feeling. Rebecca watched him. Whatever I was feeling? I didn't know how to say it. You didn't ask. I know. The words came quietly. That was what made them believable. Lawrence wasn't trying to win an argument. He looked like a man who had finally run out of explanations. I thought you were happy, he said. Rebecca looked down. I was happy sometimes. He nodded. That's what I kept telling myself. Rebecca didn't answer. I thought because we had a good house, because we had our routines, because you were still here. He stopped. I thought that meant we were okay. We were comfortable. Lawrence looked at her. Is that all? No. Rebecca's voice softened. We loved each other. He nodded. We still do. She looked at him. Maybe. Lawrence's eyes filled. Rebecca. She waited. I don't want to lose you. She looked away. You already lost something. I know. No, Lawrence. She looked back at him. You lost the version of me who would stay just because you were afraid I wouldn't. He swallowed. I know. And I don't know if I can go back. I'm not asking you to be that woman again. Then what are you asking? He took a breath. Stay long enough to see if I can become a different husband. Rebecca stared at him. Lawrence continued before she could respond. I don't know if I know how yet. That admission caught her off guard. He wasn't promising to change overnight. He wasn't telling her that everything would be different tomorrow. I've spent years thinking being a good husband meant providing, working hard, keeping the house running, making sure we were secure. Rebecca listened, and I didn't see what I was asking you to give up to make all of that possible. He looked at her. I took your flexibility and called it your personality. Rebecca lowered her eyes. I told Natalie you didn't really have ambitions. The words hung there. I knew better. Rebecca didn't move. I knew about that job. I knew how badly you wanted it. I remember you practicing for the interviews. She looked up. Lawrence gave a weak smile. You made me listen to the same answer about 5 times. A tiny smile touched Rebecca's face. I did. I know. The smile disappeared as quickly as it came. Lawrence leaned forward. I think part of me liked that you stopped asking for things. Rebecca's eyes lifted. He looked ashamed. It made my life easier. Neither of them spoke. I hate admitting that, he said. You should. I know. Rebecca sat back. At least you're finally saying it. Lawrence nodded. Then he reached across the table. Rebecca looked at his hand. He stopped before touching her. "I want you to stay," he said. She looked at him. "But I know I can't make that decision for you." Rebecca's eyes moved toward the window. "I don't know what I want. I know. I'm scared. I know. I still love you." Lawrence closed his eyes briefly. "But that doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive you. I know, and it doesn't mean I trust you. I know. And if I stay, things can't go back. They won't." Rebecca looked at him. "You can't promise that." Lawrence paused. "You're right." For the first time, he seemed to understand the difference between promising change and doing the work required to create it. "I'll have to show you," he said. Rebecca didn't answer. Lawrence stood. He looked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he simply said, "I'm asking you to stay, but I'm not asking you to decide tonight." Rebecca watched him walk away. She sat alone at the table for several minutes. The old Rebecca might have followed him. She might have reassured him. She might have said, "We're going to be okay." This time, she stayed where she was, because whatever happened next, she wanted the decision to be hers. 3 weeks later, Rebecca stood in the doorway of the bedroom with her suitcase open on the bed. She wasn't leaving the marriage. Not that morning. She was leaving for her first week of work. Her new position wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the career she might have had 12 years earlier if she had taken that first opportunity. But it was hers. Lawrence stood in the hallway. "You have everything?" Rebecca looked at the suitcase. "I think so. Need anything?" She shook her head. He nodded. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lawrence said, "I'll take you to the airport." Rebecca looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know." She almost smiled. That answer had become familiar lately. He didn't insist. He didn't argue. He simply waited. "Okay," she said. The drive to the airport was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just different. Lawrence didn't reach for his phone. Rebecca watched the road through the passenger window. When they arrived, he parked and helped her take the suitcase from the trunk. Then he stood beside her. "I meant what I said." Rebecca looked at him. "About what?" "Changing," she nodded. "I know. I've started looking for a counselor." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Good. And I ended things with Natalie." Rebecca looked at him. "I assumed you had. I should have told you. You don't have to report every move to me. I know." He hesitated. "But I want you to know I'm not asking you to stay while keeping one foot somewhere else." Rebecca nodded. That mattered. Not enough to repair everything, but enough to notice. Lawrence reached for her suitcase handle. "Can I walk you in?" Rebecca looked at him. Then she shook her head gently. "I think I can do this part myself." He let go. "Okay." She took the suitcase. Before turning away, Rebecca looked at him. "Lawrence? Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with us. I know. And I don't want you waiting for me to come back as the woman I used to be." He nodded. "I don't want that either." Rebecca studied his face. "Good." She turned and walked inside. Lawrence stayed where he was. For once he didn't follow. Weeks passed. Rebecca worked. She struggled. She learned. She came home exhausted some nights and proud on others. The job wasn't easy. Neither was rebuilding a professional identity after 12 years away. But gradually she stopped apologizing for being a beginner. Lawrence changed more quietly. He started handling things Rebecca had carried for years, not as a performance, not by announcing each task. He simply did them. He remembered appointments. He learned how to manage the house without asking Rebecca where everything was. When she came home, he didn't immediately ask whether she had time for him. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. There were still difficult conversations. There were still days when Rebecca looked at him and remembered the photograph. Trust didn't return because Lawrence wanted it to. It returned, if it returned at all, one ordinary decision at a time. Months later, Rebecca stood in the same kitchen where Lawrence had once promised there would be room for her turn. She had her work bag on the counter. Lawrence was making coffee. He looked at her. "How'd the presentation go?" "Good. Good." Rebecca smiled. Then she noticed something. Lawrence had cleared a section of the kitchen counter for her work materials. She looked at it. "You did that?" He shrugged. "You need the space." Rebecca nodded. She didn't make a big deal of it. Neither did he. That was probably why it mattered. Later that evening, Rebecca opened the old file. She took out the airport photograph. For months she had kept it. She had thought she might need it someday. Now she looked at it one last time. Lawrence beside Natalie, the moment that had changed everything. She turned the photograph over, then she placed it inside the file. She didn't throw it away. She didn't need to. It belonged to the past. Rebecca closed the file and returned it to the drawer. When she came downstairs, Lawrence was waiting. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "Yeah." He looked at her. "Are you staying?" Rebecca paused. She could have answered quickly. Instead, she walked over and sat beside him. "I don't know what the future looks like." Lawrence nodded. "But I know something now." "What?" Rebecca looked at him. "I don't have to disappear to make this marriage work." Lawrence's eyes lowered. "I know. And if we stay together, that's the marriage I want." He nodded. "I want that too." Rebecca leaned back. There was still work ahead. There would be apologies that needed to be repeated through actions. There would be trust that had to be earned. There would be moments when either of them might wonder whether they were doing the right thing. But Rebecca no longer felt trapped by either choice. She could stay. She could leave. Either way, she would still be herself. And that was the part Lawrence had finally understood. He hadn't almost lost Rebecca because another woman appeared at an airport. He almost lost her because, little by little, he had become comfortable with the version of his wife who kept making herself smaller. The woman he had expected to keep waiting for him had finally stopped waiting, and when Lawrence finally asked her to stay, Rebecca realized she could say yes without surrendering herself again. That was the difference. Not that Lawrence had finally chosen her, but that Rebecca had finally learned to choose herself. If Rebecca's story touched you, take a moment and tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed and tried to rebuild the marriage? Or would you have walked away after everything Lawrence did? And if you believe that loving someone should never require you to lose yourself, let me know by commenting, "I choose myself." If this story made you feel something, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to Mr. Graham Stories for more emotional stories about love, family, relationships, choices, and second chances. And remember, sometimes the hardest person to choose is yourself. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.